The date is February 12, 1944. A German railway worker in occupied France crouches beside the tracks near Amiens, examining what appears to be an ordinary lump of coal that has fallen from a locomotive tender. It sits amongst genuine pieces, black and unremarkable, its surface crusted with the same dull sheen. He reaches down to toss it back onto the pile. The object detonates with enough force to tear through the boiler plating, derailing 3 carriages and killing the stoker instantly. What the worker had picked up was not coal at all. It was plaster, paint, and roughly 200 grams of plastic explosive crafted in a basement workshop beneath the streets of London. This was the work of Station 15, a clandestine fabrication unit operating under the Special Operations Executive, and it represented one of the most audacious approaches to sabotage ever conceived. The logic was murderously simple. Place explosives inside perfect replicas of everyday objects, distribute them in enemy territory, and wait for human nature to do the rest. A German soldier picks up what looks like a torch. A factory supervisor examines an innocent-seeming tin of motor oil. A railway worker tosses coal into a furnace. Each action, each moment of thoughtless routine, becomes a potential trigger for catastrophe. These were not booby traps in the conventional sense. They required no wires, no pressure plates, no elaborate mechanisms. They simply sat there, indistinguishable from their surroundings, until someone's perfectly ordinary behavior transformed them into weapons. Station 15 would produce tens of thousands of these devices between 1940 and 1945, each one a small masterpiece of applied deception. And together they would inject a paralyzing paranoia into the German war machine that no amount of conventional bombing could achieve. The challenge facing British sabotage operations by 1940 was brutally straightforward. Resistance networks across occupied Europe desperately needed to disrupt German logistics, but conventional explosives presented insurmountable problems. A package of plastic explosive, no matter how carefully concealed, had to be deliberately placed, armed, and triggered. This required trained operatives to penetrate secure facilities, position devices, set timers or fuses, and escape before detonation. Each operation demanded extensive planning, exposed resistance members to capture, and produced exactly one explosion. The Germans, meanwhile, had become extraordinarily proficient at security. Railway yards employed guards who understood what to look for. Factory supervisors conducted regular searches for suspicious packages. Checkpoints examined every container, every briefcase, every parcel entering sensitive installations. The Gestapo had infiltrated resistance cells throughout France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, making every operation a gamble against betrayal. Even successful attacks often came at devastating cost. The destruction of a single railway bridge might require 6 operatives, 3 weeks of surveillance, and invariably resulted in savage reprisals against local populations. For the Special Operations Executive, tasked with coordinating resistance activities and conducting sabotage, the mathematics were unsustainable. Britain needed to multiply the impact of each operative, each ounce of explosive, each moment of access to enemy infrastructure. Traditional approaches simply could not scale to match the vast network of railways, factories, and supply depots that kept the Wehrmacht functioning. The fundamental problem was one of efficiency and detection. How could you get explosives past security without suspicious packages? How could you ensure detonation without complex fusing mechanisms that resistance fighters would struggle to operate? How could you multiply the psychological impact of sabotage beyond the immediate physical damage? The answer, when it emerged, would seem almost absurdly obvious in hindsight, but it required a peculiar combination of theatrical craft and ruthless pragmatism. Station 15 came into existence in December 1940, established in a converted mansion called the Thatched Barn in Borehamwood, Hertfordshire, though its most sensitive work would be conducted at a facility in Aston House near Stevenage. The director was Major John Whale, formerly of the Royal Engineers, but the creative genius behind the deception devices was Captain Christopher Clayton Hutton, a somewhat eccentric inventor who had previously worked in film props and theatrical effects. Hutton assembled a team that read like a peculiar cross-section of British eccentricity: stage magicians, model makers, sculptors, chemists, and one former Harrods window dresser. Their brief was to create explosive devices that could pass undetected in enemy-held territory, and their first major success was the coal bomb. The technical challenge was considerable. Real coal varied enormously in size, color, texture, and weight, depending on its source. Welsh anthracite looked nothing like Ruhr lignite. The team needed to create replicas that could sit undetected amongst genuine coal in railway tenders, factory bunkers, and depot stockpiles across multiple countries. The solution involved plaster of Paris as the base material, reinforced with sawdust for texture, and painted with a mixture of lampblack and shellac to achieve the appropriate surface finish. Each piece was individually cast from molds taken from actual coal samples, ensuring variation in size and shape. The interior cavity held between 150 and 250 grams of Nobel 808, a plastic explosive far more powerful than conventional dynamite. A small time-delay pencil fuse, activated by the heat of a furnace or boiler, completed the mechanism. The fuse was beautifully simple, a copper wire held in tension by a spring-loaded striker. When the coal bomb entered a furnace and reached approximately 130 degrees Celsius, the wire softened and parted, releasing the striker into the detonator. The delay varied from 30 seconds to several minutes, depending on the exact temperature and the thickness of the wire used. Production began in early 1941, with Station 15 eventually manufacturing an estimated 40,000 coal bombs, though exact figures remain classified. Each device weighed between 400 and 800 grams, depending on size, making them indistinguishable by weight from genuine coal lumps. The team paid obsessive attention to surface detail. Real coal shows stress fractures, sedimentation lines, and areas of differential weathering. Station 15's replicas reproduced these features precisely, using dental tools to score surface details and applying multiple layers of paint to achieve the proper depth of color. Testing proved the device's effectiveness. A coal bomb placed in a locomotive boiler would detonate with sufficient force to rupture the boiler casing, releasing superheated steam at lethal pressure and typically derailing the locomotive or rendering it inoperable for weeks. Factory boilers suffered similar damage, with the added chaos of stopping production lines and triggering investigations that consumed German resources. Distribution presented its own challenges. The coal bombs reached resistance networks through multiple channels. Some were parachuted in supply canisters alongside weapons and radio equipment. Others were smuggled through Spain and Switzerland in diplomatic pouches. The most effective method, however, involved agents simply placing them in coal stocks at strategic locations, allowing natural handling to mix them with genuine supplies. Documented uses remain sparse due to the covert nature of operations, but declassified SOE files reference deployment in France, Belgium, Norway, and northern Italy. One operation in March 1943 involved placing coal bombs in a railway depot near Lyon, resulting in 3 locomotive destructions over a 2-week period. The French resistance group reported that subsequent German inspections of all coal supplies in the region consumed hundreds of man-hours and paralyzed operations for days. A Norwegian resistance cell used coal bombs to sabotage heating systems in German administrative buildings in Oslo during January 1944, timing the attacks for maximum discomfort and disruption. The psychological impact extended far beyond physical damage. Once German authorities recognized that coal itself could be weaponized, routine procedures became sources of anxiety. Railway workers hesitated before shoveling coal. Factory hands questioned every lump that looked slightly unusual. The Kriegsmarine reportedly issued orders that all coal for naval vessels should be inspected piece by piece before loading, a process that dramatically slowed coaling operations. Some historians argue the paranoia inflicted more damage than the actual explosions, though quantifying this remains impossible. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The Germans attempted their own versions of deceptive explosive devices, but their efforts never achieved the same sophistication or psychological impact. The Abwehr produced explosive rats, genuine rodent carcasses hollowed out and filled with plastic explosive, intended for placement in British factories. The concept was sound, but execution proved disastrous. British intelligence intercepted the first shipment before any could be deployed, and the discovery allowed MI5 to warn factory managers throughout the country. What might have been effective sabotage tools instead became exhibits in training courses on what to watch for. German coal bombs existed but were crude by comparison, often using inferior molding techniques that made them distinguishable upon close examination. The Americans, meanwhile, developed their own variations under the Office of Strategic Services. Their coal bombs used similar principles but different materials, favoring concrete-based compounds that proved heavier and less convincing than the British plaster versions. Station 15's devices were distributed to American operatives in some cases, a tacit acknowledgement of British superiority in this particular dark art. The psychological warfare aspect particularly distinguished British efforts. Station 15 produced over 50 different types of deceptive devices beyond coal bombs. Explosive motor oil tins appeared identical to genuine Wehrmacht issue containers, but contained enough plastique to destroy an engine when the contents were supposedly added. Fake logs, indistinguishable from firewood, devastated heating stoves in German barracks. Wine bottles, thermos flasks, even tins of food were weaponized and distributed where German soldiers and administrators would inevitably handle them. Each device fed the same corrosive uncertainty into enemy operations. What could be trusted? What innocent object might explode when touched, opened, or used? The cumulative effect was to make everyday activities fraught with low-level dread. Assessing the actual impact of Station 15's work requires acknowledging substantial uncertainty. Many operations were never recorded in detail, agents' reports were often destroyed after action for security reasons, and German records frequently attributed unexplained explosions to accidents rather than sabotage, particularly if acknowledging enemy action would require admitting security failures. Conservative estimates suggest coal bombs alone accounted for at least 200 documented locomotive destructions and an unknown number of industrial boiler failures. The true figure almost certainly runs higher, potentially into the thousands, when including incidents that went unreported or were misattributed. The psychological impact, whilst impossible to quantify precisely, appears in German administrative records as increased security procedures, additional inspection requirements, and standing orders to suspect routine objects. Each of these measures consumed time and resources, diverting attention from productive activity. Perhaps most significantly, the concept of deceptive explosive devices influenced post-war special operations doctrine. Modern special forces maintain the capability to create similar devices, though contemporary examples remain classified. The principle that ordinary objects can become extraordinary threats has been adopted by insurgent groups worldwide, though the ethical implications of such weapons have become considerably more contentious in contexts where civilian populations bear the risk. Surviving examples of Station 15's work can be viewed at the Imperial War Museum in London and the Special Forces Museum in Hereford, where coal bombs, explosive tins, and other devices rest in climate-controlled cases, their deadly contents long since neutralized, but their craftsmanship still evident. That German railway worker near Amiens, reaching down on a cold February morning in 1944, had no reason to question what his hands found. It was coal. It looked like coal. It felt like coal. It sat amongst other pieces of coal, in a location where coal should be. Every sense confirmed it. Every expectation validated it. Every prior experience suggested the action was safe. And then, in an instant measured in milliseconds, plaster and paint and chemical explosive rewrote the ending. This was the terrible genius of Station 15's work. They weaponized normalcy itself, transforming the everyday into the lethal, the routine into the catastrophic. They understood that the most effective weapon is not necessarily the most powerful, but the one that appears when least expected, disguised as nothing at all. Tens of thousands of these devices moved through occupied Europe, each one a small piece of manufactured terror, each one waiting for that moment when human habit and human need would bring someone's hand into contact with something that should not exist. The mission was insane, perhaps, in its audacity, in its marriage of theatrical artifice and murderous intent, in its exploitation of the mundane. But it worked. And in working, it proved that sometimes the most effective way to kill real targets is with objects that, by every reasonable measure, should be entirely, completely, harmlessly fake.